Deely on the 5th anniversary of his passing. My name is Yulia Nikitenko. This seminar is a collaborative international open scientific initiative and a celebration that connects a network of dozens of scholars and organizations from all over the world. The sessions will run throughout all the year, so please follow the schedule on our website to stay tuned. You may find the link to the schedule in the description of this video on YouTube. Today, we are joining to talk about cultural semiotic perspective in digitalization of literary studies. Our guide through this exciting topic will be Dr. Alexandra Milyakina, a researcher at the Department of Semiotics in the University of Tartu, Estonia. In 2020, Dr. Milyakina accomplished her doctoral thesis exploring digitalization of literary education in the context of cultural auto-communication. Her main research interests are literary education, semiotics of culture, transmedia, and digitalization. Dr. Milyakina is a co-founder of Transmedia Research Group and digital research project Education on Screen. Thank you so much, Dr. Milyakina, for being here with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation and for this introduction. I will now share my screen just in a second. Okay, here it goes. First of all, I would like to say that it's quite not easy to concentrate on anything related to the work because all the thoughts are about the Ukraine and the colleagues, friends, and relatives. But let's try to think a bit about other matters and education in general. I was already kindly introduced, but just to say one more time, I have not only a PhD in semiotics, but also before that I received a master's in semiotics and also have studied comparative literature and journalism. So that's why my topic that I am researching now, and that was the focus of my PhD thesis, more or less combines all of my previous interests. Today I will at first provide a brief introduction to the topic of reading and teaching literature digitally. Then I will introduce the theoretical framework, which in my mind could help to conceptualize these kind of processes. And finally, I will talk a bit about the possible practical applications of semiotics of culture, and specifically our project that we are developing in Tartu at our Department of Semiotics. And it is called Education on Screen. So, first of all, introduction. Just to start with some general words about the state of reading for pleasure around the world. So, as you obviously know, the decline of reading has been widely discussed during the past decades. And if you take a look at the newspaper titles, headlines, you will see a lot of different articles named such as sharp decline in children reading for pleasure, or how to get your child reading more, or majority of parents worried about children's digital reading, and so on. However, this problem of decline of reading and the shift towards digital media is much more complex that could be implied by this public debate. And first of all, one of the important aspects is that some data suggests that actually now we're reading more and not less than we used to. And as you see in this diagram, based on the USA research covering like almost 60 years, it shows that even though the percentage of print in daily media consumption has become much less than before, nevertheless, we can see that reading has tripled since 1918 to 2008, because this was the year of the research. And this is connected to the emergence of internet communication. And today we can say that people are reading even more than ever, but this is often overlooked because we have a very limited range of conceptual tools for analyzing such types of reading and meaning making in different forms. So we can say that digital technology has affected our reading and learning practices. And here I would like to make a distinction which was offered by previous research. So on the one hand, we have digitization, which could be distinguished from digitalization. Sorry, this my dog. I hope you hear me. So digitization is is a simpler process which implies just the material process of converting analog streams of information into digital bits. And this process implies the creation of digital versions of various analog texts. Whereas digitalization is like a name for a more complex process or like number of processes, and it could be defined as the way many domains of social life are structured around digital communication and media infrastructures. And this implies also the digitalization of different processes, such as the more higher usage of multimodality, fragmentarity, also anonymity and playfulness. So in contrast to the digital texts that are becoming increasingly multimodal, nonlinear, and collaborative, the printed book of the past used to be mostly verbal, linear, and created by a single author. Also, now the roles of the readers and authors are blurred, and we witness the emergence of participatory culture, as well as the phenomenon called as presuming, producing and creation and consuming at the same time. But I will talk about all these processes a little bit later. Books come in all shapes and sizes and forms, but still conventional image of the book is something like that. So a physical paper-based artifact. This kind of image of the book still remains dominant. And here is, for instance, one of the oldest known preserved editions of the Hamlet. And even though Hamlet is the work that everybody refers to, actually only few people could say that they have actually read it in the original. Firstly, due to the fact that it is written in a very, very difficult, very different language to nowadays English, as well as the difficulty of understanding the cultural context and so on. And at the same time, reading full-length versions of literary texts is still considered as a norm, which is yet less and less attainable. And now we will use the terminology of Anton Popovich, a literary scientist and translation researcher who suggested to define prototext as a text which serves an object of intertextual continuity, or as the primary text, which is then adapted in various forms, whereas metatext is a model of the prototext and the way in which these two texts, prototext and metatext, are linked. So now I will talk about the metatexts, or these adaptations or translations, if we use semiotic term, of Hamlet in the digital age. It is possible to say that nowadays it is more common for a reader to become acquainted with Hamlet through different metatexts, including mostly digital ones. And it is even possible to become introduced to this classic work without even reading the original play of Shakespeare. Of course, this won't be the very deep kind of contact, but still such preliminary acquaintance could facilitate further understanding of the text and give a reader some foretaste of time and space. So we could describe such kind of metatexts as nano texts, or very, very small texts. This is the term of Hampson. And we can see that these texts are a result of compression and recursion of information through digital means. And here, at first, we can see a retelling of Shakespeare's play with Twitter tools, then a video game also about Hamlet, a very short comic strip, which is basically retelling the whole story in several panels, and finally a meme. So metatexts could be considered as models of the prototext that compress the whole story into one frame and or into few lines of text. And for sure, such kind of text could potentially reach a much wider audience than the original play, since it's already not very much available to the larger, wide audience. But yet it is unclear whether such kind of metatext eventually lead us to the original source, or just reduce it to a very simplistic version of the original. If we try to compare these kind of texts side by side, or paper-based reading versus reading in the digital age, and reading these small nanotexts or metatexts, we will see that the first type of reading required uninterrupted and long-lasting attention to a single medium. Whereas this reading in the digital age implies that we are constantly multitasking and switching between different modes and media. Then previously it was reading based on full-length texts, so books from cover to cover, whereas now it's reading based on fragments. Also, we can contrast monomodal to multimodal. Also, the previous versions, the more conventional forms of literature imply the existence of a specific author and faithfulness to this authorial discourse, whereas nowadays these kind of digital texts allow for the coexistence of multiple discourses, and even convergence of the author and the reader. And finally, paper-based reading implies the existence of a predefined reading path, so you can read the book, usually normal book, only from like first page to the last page, if it's not an interactive book such as Hopscotch by Cortázar, which obviously offers another kind of reading. But reading in the digital age implies that this path is designed in course of the reading. So while we are dealing with these new type of retellings in multiple forms, we cannot say for sure which will be the best way to perceive them, and this path is designed by each reader individually. So this also could be explored from the perspective of divergence and convergence, the most general cultural processes as defined by Jenkins, who considered divergence as diversification of media channels and delivery mechanisms, whereas convergence, in his mind, is the situation in which multiple media systems coexist and where media content flows fluidly across them. According to Henry Jenkins, these two processes, they are complementary, and it is possible to describe contemporary media culture from the perspective of divergence and convergence. So on the one hand, we witness the shift from paper-based books to a whole variety of media. So now the same or new information could be also conveyed through films, video games, comics, podcasts, and memes, not only paper-based books. So yes, diversification of channels. But at the same time, we see that there is a tendency to integrate different types of media within single platforms. And we are moving also from paper-based books to whole transmedia spaces. So on the one hand, we have more media channels, but on the other hand, they are being integrated or converged into some larger systems. Okay, moving on to this one of the quotes, which is quite old, but still it quite well describes the concerns of educational systems and some conservative teachers. So future narratives for the computer reader using the internet and multimedia may seem to be no more, no less than individual or unaccessible chaos. Quote by Hunt. This is quite understandable because digital texts tend to disrupt the status quo about everything we know about literature, and it is a strong need to develop the new methodological and pedagogical framework for dealing with such kind of digital texts and future narratives for the computer reader. So how it is possible to make sense of these future narratives and integrate them into the system of education? And how it is possible to reach understanding of a specific text if it's now replaced with multiple fragments in different media. It is indeed a very problematic question, and it is yet to be answered, but we can come up with tools, methodological tools from different fields of science to offer some solutions. Indeed, it would require us to focus on the phenomena that have been considered as peripheral or marginal to the system of education. So these kind of examples that I have showed you before. Yes, so I believe myself that exploring such digital metatexts could be a way to learn more about the original, as we need to analyze which elements are preserved, which elements are transformed or eliminated, and what strategies, translation strategies are being used by the authors of these metatexts. So if we sum up the main research questions based on what I have talked about right before, we could say that on the one hand, we need to analyze the new ontology of literary texts and literary education in the digital age. So what does it, how does it look like nowadays? What, how does it exist? And the second will be developing different ideas about adapting literary education to these new circumstances. I have already introduced some, referred to some theories, but now I will go deeper into theoretical framework. And at first, I need to mention that there are different ways, different branches of semiotics that deal with the problem of education. One of them is stems from general semiotics, and it's edu-semiotics, based on such keywords as sign or semiosis, and represented by such researchers as, for instance, Semetsky and Stables. But today I won't be talking about this approach, even though I'm very fond of the works that these researchers have presented. But I will introduce the framework of semiotics of culture, developed mainly here in Tartu Moscow Semiotic School, which considers culture, the whole culture, as a system of education, and it is focused on such keywords as culture, text, language, mediation, and auto communication. I will also try to show how this particular framework is connected to previous research, such as the translation studies, and also more contemporary research, such as transmedia research and works belonging to multimodal approach. So even though the name of my talk is cultural semiotic perspective, it will be impossible to ignore other fields that semiotics of culture overlap with, and I will try to show which kind of notions could be connected to the notions within other fields. I would like to illustrate some of the main notions of semiotics of culture. At first, we need to consider culture as a system of languages. According to Yuri Lotsman, the main representative, one of the key representatives of Tartu Moscow School, who also has a 100th year anniversary this year. So culture could be seen as a language and also as a totality of texts in this language. So we should consider that any culture implies the existence of hierarchy of different cultural languages. And by cultural languages, we mean, for instance, language of art, of literature, language of architecture, and so on, including, of course, the natural language, such as English, Estonian, Russian, and so on. Lotman made a distinction between iconic spatial and discrete verbal languages. So iconic spatial languages are those which are used for the creation of text, which we can perceive only as a whole. So if we take a look at the picture, we can, of course, divide it into certain parts, but generally the meaning is perceived by looking at the painting or other image as a whole. Whereas discrete languages imply that it is possible to divide each text into specific elements, such as words or sentences or specific symbols. And so, yes, and if we are talking about Western culture, alphabetic culture, it also implies that it is linear, so we are reading it from left to right and from up to downwards. Yuri Lotman paid specific attention to the problem of partial untranslatability across these languages, because evidently it is not possible to take a verbal text and create an image which will be a 100% faithful translation of this text. Or we also cannot do it vice versa. Some of the information will be eventually lost and also transformed. And also this implies the complementarity of these languages in culture, because some information is stored and communicated in iconic languages, and some information is conveyed with discrete languages. Cultural auto-communication is another important notion, and basically any act of translation across languages or not across languages, any act of interpretation is a part of the cultural communication with itself. And Lotman talks about mnemonic and creative functions which are fulfilled by repetition of knowledge across cultural languages. So why mnemonic and creative? Mnemonic means that each time we are repeating a certain information, we are connecting it, we are making it more visible and more valuable and more deeply rooted in the active memory. So, for instance, each time the Hamlet is repeated or retold, it is remembered better and better. Creative function of cultural auto-communication is exemplified by transformations and additions that each of the authors, each of the translators eventually make to the original, because as I already said, full translatability is not possible. Also, Lotman claims that culture is isomorphic to the text and to the consciousness of the individual, which means that all of them have a similar structure and a similar mechanism that they're based on. And he describes the whole human culture as semiospheres inserted into one another. So basically, each act of translation or interpretation that we make on the individual level is also included into the whole process of cultural auto-communication. Evidently, this kind of translation, which is all the time, which is happening all the time, and results in some loss of information, it creates a risk of incompleteness. But Lotman says that this incompleteness of information is compensated by its stereoscopicity, or possibility of getting completely different projection of the same reality, or its translation into completely different language. And stereoscopicity can be seen as a key aspect of cultural auto-communication, because the development of these non-identical images of the same text in the minds of different people can make communication more complex and at the same time help to enrich the culture. And I would like to illustrate the above mentioned concepts with the example of Shield of Achilles from the Iliad. And this is one of the oldest known examples of ekphrasis, or verbal description of a work of art. And here we see actually an example of reverse translation. So this image of the shield of Achilles was created based on the description provided by Homer in the Iliad. But Homer, of course, himself was also describing some actual artifacts. Excuse me. Here we can see the coexistence of iconic and discrete verbal languages. On the one hand, by looking at this image, we can perceive it as a whole sign, whereas we perceive text. Well, this is actually not an excerpt from the poem, but just a short summary, but still it's verbal text, which we perceive as a collection of signs. And if we refer to the theoretical framework offered by Roman Jakobson, we can say that Homer was actually conducting an intersemiotic translation or translation across semiotic systems. Mnemonic function of cultural auto-communication is realized in such way that each repetition, with each repetition, this image of the shield is integrated even deeper into our cultural memory. And the creative function implies that the translatability is only partial, and there is a need to compensate it by some creative transformations. Okay, so this is a quote from my colleagues, Peter Torup and Maria Weyman, who are also representatives of Tartu Moscow School and developers of Latmanian approach. So as you see here, the quote reads, "Any text may exist in a series of possible forms and interpretations, none of which is the ultimate or ideal one." And this leads us to 2 ways for learning culture, as introduced by Lotman in one of his early articles. On the one hand, according to Lotman, culture could be seen as a sum of texts created within this culture. On the other hand, he says that culture could be considered as a set of languages that these texts are created with. So in the first case, literacy is based upon a shared memory of certain collection of canonical texts, including not only literary works, but also films, paintings, architecture, phenomena, and so on. Whereas in the second approach, culture is regarded as a set of languages used for meaning making, and the notion of cultural literacy is based on command of languages that are used for creating texts in given culture. So from this viewpoint, in order to be considered culturally literate, you need to be able to communicate with specific languages. And we propose to integrate these 2 ways for learning literature. So both to acquire a certain knowledge of the canonical texts, but at the same time, simultaneously try to develop languages, develop the skills for perceiving such kind of texts in multiple forms. The multiplicity of literary work has been also conceptualized within translation studies. Specifically, I would like to mention the works of Popovich and Makri, who introduced the notion of literary synthesis. that they defined as a memory of literature or secondary manipulation of texts included in the literary education. And the researchers make a typology of different literary phenomena, which they define as at first image of the original, or like different forms in which the original work exists in. So all kinds of the metatexts that I have shown before basically could be also considered as an image of the original. Also, literary synthesis includes interpretation or criticism, theory, instruction for reception. And finally, it also includes a literary advertisement or a museum myth or announcement. Also, Popovich and Macri suggests the term of meta-communication or metatexts, and they claim that literary texts are always mediated by specific meta-communicative agents, such as editors, copyists, librarians, historians, and so on. So basically, it is hardly possible to perceive the original because there is no original as such. All the time it is already communicated or mediated by specific mediators. And here is the typology or the map that Popovich and Macri offered. So as you see, here some of the elements are existing on the verge of various types, belong to several categories at once. Okay, so yes, basically here all types of texts, and here different types of reception or interpretation or education, and here is things related to the popularization of literature and different surrounding materials such as biography or literary myth. In my PhD thesis, I offered a digital version, updated version of literary synthesis, which includes different examples from contemporary types of texts. So intersemiotic translation now can be exemplified by comic strips, animations, book trailers, digital books, transmedia adaptations, and so on. Nanotexts will belong to this category of digests and annotations. Also, we can place here different corpora and multi-text editions, whereas these category of interpretations could be exemplified on the one hand by different online courses and video lessons, as well as virtual tours or literary maps. And on the other hand, it is represented by different elements of participatory work or user-generated content instead of old school essays. Such as fan fiction, creation of book trailers, visual arts, posts on social media, and so on. And of course, literary advertisement has also developed since the times of Popovich and Macri, and now includes all kinds of various formats. It is important to say that the functions of literary education, such as providing this image of the original, interpretation, and literary advertisement, are realized simultaneously informal, non-formal, and informal learning. So this means that it is valid not only for formal learning settings such as schools and universities, but also for non-formal and informal learning. Non-formal learning is exemplified by different learning environments that have some organizational framework, but do not follow a formal syllabus, such as reading groups, debating societies, amateur chores, and so on. As for informal learning, it takes place outside schools and colleges and arises from the learner's involvement in activities that are not undertaken with learning purpose in mind. So, and according to this paper, document by Council of Europe, informal learning is involuntary and inescapable parts of daily life. And here we, from here we move on to transmedia studies, which has been focused extensively on informal education. And in many regards, it overlaps with the principles of semiotic of culture. So just to remind that transmedia storytelling implies that story unfolds across multiple media platforms, with each text making distinctive and valuable contribution to the whole. Therefore, one of the main skills is transmedia navigation, or ability to follow the flow of stories across multiple modalities. Here we can say that transmedia navigation would imply the combination of two ways for learning culture as defined by Lotman, so both deeper understanding of the story, but also better knowledge of its medium specificity, or the command of cultural languages. Also, transmedia existence of a text implies that it is it belongs to the realm of presuming, which combines producing and consuming. And this also changes the way we perceive literature and different literary types of literary content. So books no longer represent the end of the story, but survive only as parts or both end worlds, where they belong to a more general world of text. And evidently, it also changes the role of the teacher, if the teacher is even present in this system. So who becomes a knowledge facilitator or cultural translator, serving as an interface between education institution and external media ecology where the students live and create. And specifically, this external media ecology has been studied by Scolari and his colleagues from 8 countries in like few years ago. So here is the map, probably known to some of you, where Scolari with the colleagues tried to place all kinds of skills, transmedia skills that contemporary young people use in their daily lives. So starting from like using photography and editing skills to cosplay and I don't know, cybersecurity and so on. And also this research by Scolari and his team not only includes this map of transmedia skills and analysis of social media platforms that young people use, but also provides some ideas for integrating these skills with formal learning environments. So they also offer very interesting didactic cards for training all these type of skills in formal learning settings. And finally, one more methodological approach, which is quite connected to the previous ones, is multimodal approach, which implies that meanings are made through many representational communication resources, of which verbal language is but one. Multimodal approach implies that there is a hierarchy of modes, which reflects the values and power relations of existing society. Whereas older pages embodied notions of authority and authorship, contemporary pages are designed on the basis of very different social relation of the author, reader, and meaning making. So the thing that I mentioned when I talked about presuming. And multimodal pedagogy implies that you can promote the agency of students by offering them to consider learning as a form of design, or taking control over their own learning. So whereas formal literary education is considered as an instrument of governality, or a set of organized practices, in words of Foucault, through which subjects are produced and controlled, we can say that in informal learning, the students, the learners can take agency in their own hands, and learn by following their own interests rather than external goals. So this is like a general framework offered by Günter Kress, one of the main developers of multimodal approach. So it shows how the inner sign is formed within a learner by just following the interest, from interest to attention to engagements and so on. So this was a brief, not very brief, like introduction of theoretical framework, and now I will briefly talk about the practical applications. So we, in our Department of Semiotics in Tartu, work at the development of digital learning platforms, which are considered as a means of convergence. And you can define digital learning platform either as interface for accessing different types of media, as proposed by Manovich, or as a mechanism that also emerges and initiates the emergence of new types of texts, as offered by Bolen. With digital learning platforms, we aim to integrate different levels. At first, texts, so integrate text together with proto-texts and metatexts, also the original text with all its reflections in culture. Also, we aim to connect older and born digital participatory media, as well as different learning habits by balancing modalities and discourses. Also, since Estonia is a multicultural country, we consider digital learning platform as a space for facilitating dialogue between different cultures. Here is just a small piece of information about our project called Education on Screen, founded already 7 years ago. And we aim to provide a cultural analysis of different peripheral phenomena, such as listed before, and introduce new media environment in practical analysis of culture, as well as exploring the educational nature of culture. These are the projects that we have so far developed. If you're interested, you can follow the link. And now I will talk just a bit about our latest project, Estonian Film Classics. So this particular platform focuses on key Estonian film texts, and specifically the novel Spring by Oskar Lutz, as well as its eponymous film adaptation. The platform has three parts. At first, we introduce Spring as a canon and discuss what is the secret behind its popularity. Then we explore the world of Spring, or the map of different metatexts and translations. And finally, we offer students the possibility to explore their creativity in multiple media and discourses. So this DIY Spring is a collection of guidelines for creating rap song retellings or videos, reaction videos on YouTube, or memes, and so on. This is just an illustration from the first part of our platform, where we introduce Spring as the core text of Estonian culture, which was translated into 14 languages and released in 23 editions. Also, it is considered as the best Estonian film of the century, according to the public surveys in Estonia. And also it has set a record for the number of people who have watched the film. So yes, in this part, we just, parts of the platform, we just analyze with students why Spring is so important, and how different researchers or different public figures argument its popularity. So the second part is Transmedia world of Spring, where we have mapped all kinds of different metatexts or allusions, starting from full-length text theatrical performances to quite marginal phenomena, such as dishes named after characters, or craft beer brews, and so on. And this map is interactive. You can click on different elements, read information about them. And we ask students to answer a number of questions. For instance, they are asked to analyze which elements of the original text are more preserved, so which motives are most persistent, and which ones are transformed. For instance, we can see that some of the parodies aim to fix the lacks present in the original work, for instance, by providing information about the backstory of the negative characters. So in the parodies, we can learn why these negative characters are behaving in this or that way, even though this wasn't available in Oskar Lutz's original, as well as its adaptation. Also, we ask students to see which translational strategies were used, and try to analyze how each of these metatexts can affect the image of the original. Also, this third section of the platform offers a possibility to create adaptation of Spring in various digital formats, which exemplifies this movement from consuming to presuming, as well as mnemonic and creative functions of cultural auto-communication. Now I will move on to the conclusions. So hopefully I have demonstrated with this very, very brief presentation how the above mentioned tendencies or ideas could be applied to the practice. In conclusion, I can say that digitalization of later education could be considered as a moment of explosion, which, according to Yuri Lotman, is always accompanied by the stage of gradual change. So on the one hand, we can see the boom of various digital formats, which are developing very fast. But at the same time, educational policies are still, educational systems are not very active in adapting to these new circumstances, even though it is happening quite slowly. And still, the main change drivers in these circumstances are not the educational systems themselves, but grassroots efforts of teachers, developers, and scholars. Dispersion of original texts across multiple discourses and media is not the way to simplify it or create some profane versions, but also if we consider it from cultural semiotic perspective, it is a way to maintain its status in the active memory and enrich cultural heritage by transforming the original work and adding some creative transformations. Semiotics of culture allows regarding these digital metatexts as important elements of cultural auto-communications and integrating them in the system of literary education in this capacity. And it is possible to synthesize different types of texts with the help of digital platforms. On the example of our platform, we can see that such collection of metatexts could be seen as a corpus or as a guidebook for the original text. And even such fragment-based or metatext-based reading could be seen as a way to reverse engineer the image of the original. At the same time, a digital learning platform supplies students with tools for expressing their creativity in various media and modes, and therefore participating in the process of cultural auto-communication and as well as engaging in the dialogue with the cultural heritage. So here are just few links from my side, not all of them, but also it is possible to read, if you're interested, the papers produced within our department of semiotics, because we discuss all the things that I have very briefly covered today. So that's all from my side, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milyakina, for this presentation. The topic is very important for everybody, and I think everybody can relate to this. And I would like to announce to our audience in YouTube that now we will be closing the broadcast. And also would like to remind that you may find the details about next meetings. We have the link in the description to this video. And for those who are here with us on Zoom, the session will continue and we will open the discussion for everybody who has questions or suggestions. You're welcome. Just